In today's world, we're exposed to much suffering. Images of war and violence are closer than ever. The climate crisis and recognition of past injustice has given us a wider view of both historic and future suffering. This awareness of suffering must be addressed within us. We can't help everyone. However, cultural norms would ask us, at minimum, to recognize suffering and empathize with affected people, provide thoughts and prayers. Often we're asked to condemn, begrudge, decry, or denounce others. As our awareness of the world's pervasive suffering grows, our response often becomes either despair, resentment, or apathy. And that reminded me of this quote. When to the world's turmoil thy budding soul lends ear, when to the roaring voice of the great illusion thy soul responds, when frightened at the sight of the hot tears of pain, when deafened by the cries of distress, thy soul withdraws like the shy turtle within the carapace of selfhood. Learn, O disciple, of her silent God. Thy soul is an unworthy shrine. I look around and I feel like I see a lot of people who have withdrawn into their shells, shy turtles all around me. And I feel like I've spent a lot of my time being blinded by all this and seeing so overwhelmed with the turmoil that doing nothing seems to be the only reasonable solution. And withdrawing into selfhood and selfishness seems to be a real appealing alternative to facing up to our potentiality in this world at this point. So how can theosophic teachings help us find a rational response to a world with more crisis than we can handle? In this presentation, I'm hoping to provide that rational and comprehensive view of the world and provide direction and purpose that we can find in this life. Explain injustice and offer an appropriate response that we can take to the injustice around us. And also help us adjust our expectations for what the world should be like and what we should be able to expect from it. The first piece to this is the Theosophical worldview. This was first published in 1982 during the presidency of Dora Kunz. The Theosophical worldview statement provides a sound theosophical guidepost as to what constitutes a theosophical perspective. This proves an invaluable resource to help orient our attitude towards the world. The Theosophical Society, while reserving for each member full freedom to interpret those teachings known as Theosophy, is dedicated to preserving and realizing the ageless wisdom, which embodies both a worldview and a vision of human self-transformation. This tradition is founded upon certain fundamental propositions. The first proposition is that the universe and all that exists within it are one interrelated and interdependent whole. This first proposition underlies the foundation of our reality. It eliminates the us and them dynamic right from the very beginning. This is the foundation for the Theosophical Society's first object and provides a lifetime of study of the downstream implications of what this statement really means. You know, it's one of the most sparse slides you'll see, but it's also one of the most deep because it includes absolutely everything that we recognize as reality. The second proposition is that every existent being from atom to galaxy is rooted in the same universal life-creating reality. This reality is all pervasive, but it can never be summed up in its parts since it transcends all expressions. It reveals itself in the purposeful, ordered, and meaningful processes of nature, as well as in the deepest recesses of the mind and spirit. You know, some people deride the concept of an intelligent design. But I think when we show proper respect to the forms and the beings that surround us, we find proof of our transcendent and interdependent reality. It's in giving that respect, you can really see there's no way that it's not wholly interconnected. The third proposition is the recognition of the unique value of every living being. And it expresses itself in reverence for life, compassion for all, sympathy with the need of individuals to find truth for themselves, and respect for every religious tradition. The ways in which these ideals become realities, though, and individual life are both the privileged choice and the responsible act of every human being. Accepting this kinship and this unique value of every living being, this really means to take part in their flourishing and allowing them to blossom of their own nature. And once you have that sense of kinship, you want to cultivate that growth in others and in everything in our world. And lastly, in the worldview, they speak of a unity beyond all difference. Central to the concerns of Theosophy is the desire to promote understanding and fellowship among people of all races, nationalities, philosophies, and religions. Therefore, all people, whatever their race, creed, sex, caste, or color, are invited to participate equally in the life and the work of the society. The Theosophical Society imposes no dogmas, but points towards the source of unity beyond all differences. The Education Committee identified as central to the promotion of understanding and fellowship. If there is a driving force in Theosophy, it is a desire to share and develop understanding and to cultivate fellowship among other evolving beings. We come to Theosophy with these shared ideals and not that of imposed systems or hierarchies. So what are we to do in particular as we move forward with this worldview? Well, we follow our dharma, of course. So in Annie Besant's small book, Dharma, she had what I thought was the most elegant and useful definition of dharma that I've come across. It's so refined that I could express it as a formula, and I think this is the algorithm for our own personal evolution. So Annie says, I will venture to remind you of the definition of dharma we adopted, that it means the inner nature marked by the stage of evolution plus the law of growth for the next stage of evolution. Right? So in my formula, you can see in order to determine our dharma, we need to first know what our inner nature is all about. There's a lot of self-discovery in Theosophy in order to discover that inner nature and really learn what our purpose is and what we're about. And then to recognize at what stage of that personal evolution are we? We're not fully developed at any point in our life. So at what stage are we at? What kind of that being are we so far? Once we've determined these things, then we can start looking towards the law of growth. So what would growth look like for that person? What would it take to get our stage plus one, to grow by one? By identifying these aspects of ourselves and in this direction, we can really find what our dharma is and what direction that we should be pointed at. And where should we be pointed? Well, we should be pointing at what's right. And to find that, Annie Besant says, that is right which works with the divine purpose in the evolution of the universe and forwards that evolution from the imperfect to the perfect. That is wrong, which delays or frustrates that divine purpose and tends to push the universe back to the stage from which it's evolving. The universe is growing from mineral to vegetable, from the vegetable to the animal, and from the animal to the animal man, and then from the animal man to the divine man. That is right, which helps the evolution towards divinity, and that is wrong, which drags it backwards or impedes its progress. So once we've accepted our inner nature and we get at what stage we're at, we need to orient ourselves towards this divinity to find where the law of growth is taking us. So it's in that direction, what would constitute growth? So our next stage of evolution in the direction of this divinity, in the direction of this evolution. So between having the formula for dharma and then recognizing what right and wrong is, we can start to position ourselves in the world in a way that makes sense and in which we can justify our actions and our behaviors. So we come now to the great question of separateness. There lies in very deed the essence of wrong. In the past, separateness was right. The great course of the divine life stream was dividing itself into multiplicity. It was needed to build up individual centers of consciousness. So long as the center needs strengthening, Separateness is on the side of progress. In our infancy, we're wholly dependent. And it was essential for us that we grew independent and learned to care for ourselves. Still, when we are injured or ill, we are often dependent on others. However, once we are able and our center of consciousness gains independence, it is essential that we return to those consciousnesses that need our care and strengthening for this next stage of our own evolution. Our return to others, our return to service is what constitutes our growth from independence back into service to others. It's the natural cycle, and it's important that we make that second transition from independence back to interdependence. Souls at one period need to be selfish. They cannot do without selfishness in the early stages of growth. But now the law of progressing life for the more advanced is the outgrowing of separateness and the seeking to realize unity. We are now on the path towards unity. We are approaching nearer and nearer to each other. We must now unite in order to grow further. As we move closer on all the planes of our existence, our return to unity helps to form a fully integrated and interwoven humanity. Our insistence on separateness and a unique individuality is holding back both our own and the larger cultural flourishing that can only come from interdependency and encouraging this interwoven relationship. So we come to a test of conduct. That thought leads us to another test of conduct. Is the action we are doing one which seeks our own gain or which helps on the general good? Is our life a self-seeking, useless life, or does it help humanity? If it is selfish, then it is wrong. It is evil. It is against the growth of the world. If you be among those who have seen the beauty of the ideal of unity and have recognized the perfection of the divine manhood that you see, then you should kill out this heresy of separateness in yourself. These are harsh words. This is a tough standard. This doesn't mean saving the whole world, though. We all have opportunities to help others and to increase the general good. The question is, can we ask ourselves daily, is my action against the growth of the world? Or is my action helping in the flourishing? And that should be the test of conduct that we put ourselves through to determine whether or not we're oriented towards the good, whether we're oriented towards our next stage of growth. So while sometimes actions are clearly selfish or clearly helpful, other times it can be ambiguous or difficult to judge when we're looking at the behavior of others. So Annie Besant goes on to say, suppose that one of you had climbed 5 steps up and another 2 steps, while a third was standing on the platform. For the man who had climbed up 5 steps, to stand beside the man who was on the second step would be to descend. But for the man on the platform to stand beside the man on the second step would be to ascend. So suppose that every rung of this ladder represents an action. Each would be both moral and immoral at the same time, according from the point of view from which we look at it. So that 2 persons may well stand on the same rung of the ladder, but the one having gone upwards and the other having come downwards to reach it, the action for the one is moral and the other is immoral. If we realize that, we shall begin to find our law. So karma isn't even, it's appropriate. And so it's not necessarily we can tell clearly by this action is good, this action is bad. The question is it good or bad for us? Is it good or bad for the stage of evolution that the actor is coming from? Separation is the mark of descent into matter, and unification is the mark of ascent to spirit. The world is on the upward trend, although thousands of souls may lag behind. The ideal now is peace, cooperation, protection, brotherhood, and helpfulness. And the essence of sin now lies in separateness. So it really matters at what stage of growth we're at and where we stand in terms of what's good and bad and what the appropriate steps to take are going forward. But what about all the people just going downstairs? I mean, shouldn't we tell them? Shouldn't we be telling other people that they're going the wrong way? I mean, it's not just us, right? It is an independent reality. Well, in terms of telling others they're going downstairs or where the stairs are, we have to be cautious because if we set before an unprepared soul an ideal so lofty that it does not move him, we check their evolution. If you give to a peasant the ideal of a Brahman, you are placing before him an impossible ideal. And the result is he does nothing. When you tell a man a thing too high for him, that man knows that you have been talking nonsense. For you have commanded him to perform that which he has no power to perform. Your folly has placed before him motives that do not move him. So you can tell other people about things, but some folks, they just think you're talking nonsense. They're not going to do anything anyway. And I think most of us have encountered this. They have to learn for themselves. They know their inner nature and they know what their next stage for growth is if they know that inner nature. But oftentimes we are so clever that we appeal to the lowest sinner by motives which can only stir the highest saint. And thus, instead of helping those people, we're actually checking their evolution. You know, sometimes it's our inability to check our own enthusiasm, which then checks others' evolution. You know, you want to share, you want to bring people in, you want to tell people what you know, and sometimes that's just preventing them from learning their own lesson. So so the question remains, so what about speaking up and being the voice to the opposition, to oppose the people going downstairs and working towards separation? Well, we should be cautious. HBB tells us the duty of defending a fellow man stung by a poisonous tongue during his absence, and to abstain in general from condemning others, is the very life and soul of practical theosophy. For such action is the handmaiden who conducts one into the narrow path of this higher life, that life which leads to the goal that we all crave to attain, all those on the spiritual path. Mercy, charity, and hope are the three goddesses who preside over that life. To abstain from condemning our fellow beings is the tacit assertion of the presence in us of those three divine sisters. To condemn on hearsay shows their absence. So if we vociferously condemn and decry the evildoer in their absence, or engage in this hearsay, we give proof that we're not as theosophically minded as we might like to be or think we are. It might feel like the right thing in this condemnation to speak out against this evil, but in the way that we do it, we can betray what our real intentions are and what our own real stage of evolution, our personal evolution is. HBB also says, severe denunciation is a duty to truth. It is, on condition, however, that one should denounce and fight against the root of evil, and not expend one's fury by knocking down the irresponsible blossoms of its plant. The wise horticulturist uproots the parasitic herbs and will hardly lose time in his garden shears to cut off the heads of the poisonous weeds. So we should decry evil, but ensure we're attacking the roots of the evil. Knocking about the blossoms only spreads their seed and proliferates the problem. And oftentimes, that's what I see confronting the evil in our world is I see people who are only knocking around the blossoms, only spreading more ill will and bad feeling. So what can we do? What's an affirmative act that we can take if we're not denouncing and decrying? Well, Annie Besant, she says, in his daily life, he can neutralize the ill results that would follow from some ill deed by bringing to bear upon the same point a corresponding force for good. A man sends against him an evil thought. He might meet it with another of its own. And then the two thought forms running together like two drops of water would be reinforced, strengthened by each other. But this one against whom the evil thought is flying is a knower of karma. And he meets the malignant form with the force of compassion and shatters it. The broken form can no longer be ensouled with elemental life. The life melts back to its own. The form disintegrates. Its power for evil is thus destroyed by compassion, and hatred ceases by love. Taking on the thought form with its counter, this is what neutralizes it. Meeting hatred with hatred, well, this is counterproductive and it impedes the further spiritual evolution for everybody involved. So we need to resist meeting hatred with hatred if we don't want to also be part of the problem. Delusive forms of falsehood go forth into the astral world. The man of knowledge sends against them forms of truth. Purity breaks up foulness, and charity, selfish greed. So offering that central knowledge and understanding, so central to the concerns of theosophy, well, this is the antidote to the delusion, to the foulness, and to the selfish greed of our time. But it's through brotherhood and understanding that we find this. As our knowledge increases, this action to counter these thoughts becomes direct and purposive. The thought is aimed with definite intent. It has a winged and a potent will. Thus, evil karma is checked in its very inception, and naught is left to make a karmic tie between the one who shot the shaft of injury and the one who burned it up through their pardon. This counter thought as a response can be finely tuned and like wielded as a force for good in the world. As we witness the propagation of evil, we can neutralize and divert this karmic act through our targeted will and understanding. This is an affirmative act. This is something we can take with us to fight against this malignancy. Because it seems that when men generate a large number of malignant thought forms of a destructive character, and when these congregate in huge masses on the astral plane, their energy may be and is precipitated on the physical plane, stirring up wars, revolutions, social disturbances, and upheavals of every kind, falling as collective karma on their progenitors and affecting widespread ruin. Sound familiar? Thus, then, collectively also, man is the master of his destiny, and his world is molded by his creative action. So these thought forms may not seem like as real or as important as the physical suffering that surrounds us. However, they manifest themselves as physical acts, both precipitating and transmitting social disturbances. Our world is molded by our response. Our world is molded by our response to these incipient manifestations of destruction. Epidemics of crime and disease, cycles of accidents have a similar explanation, says Annie Besant. Thought forms of anger aid in the perpetration of a murder. So So in this murder, these elementals are nourished by the crime itself, and then the results of that crime. The hatred and the revengeful thoughts of those who love the victim, the fierce resentment of the criminal, his baffled fury when violently sent out to the world. Still, further reinforce their host with many malignant forms. These again, from the astral plane, impel an evil man to fresh crime. And again, the circle of impulses is trodden, and we have an epidemic of violent deeds. The attention given to these negative acts only multiply and magnify the effects of those acts. Hurt people. And by countering these negative things with more negativity, we only exacerbate the problems. Diseases spread, and the thoughts of fear which follow their progress act directly as strengtheners of the power of the disease. Magnetic disturbances are set up and propagated and react on the magnetic spheres of people within the affected area. In every direction, in endless fashions, do men's evil thoughts play havoc, as he who should have been a divine co-builder in the universe uses his creative power to destroy. If we cannot escape these malignant thought forms, then we're only acting as conduits for the distribution of those thought forms. So if a negative thing happens and we respond with negativity and we project out that negativity in our lives, we're only acting as a conduit for this evil. We have to control these thoughts. We have to control the spread of these diseases in the forms of this thought. So once we understand this, and with an outline of the great law of karma and its workings, by a knowledge of which a man may accelerate his evolution, by the utilization of which a man may free himself from bondage and become, long ere his race has trodden its course, one of the helpers and the saviors of the world. So it's only if we can escape the malignant thought forms and accept the truth of the great law of karma can we become real helpers and begin to do our part in saving the world. But we have to accept the inevitability of this, because there is no evasion. A deep and steady conviction of the truth of this law, the law of karma, gives to life an immovable serenity and a perfect fearlessness. Nothing can touch us that we have not wrought. Nothing can injure us that we have not merited if we've accepted karma, if we acknowledge that. And as everything that we have sown must ripen into harvest in due season and must be reaped, it is idle to lament over the reaping when it is painful. It may as well be done now as at any future time, since it cannot be evaded. And once done, it cannot return to trouble us again. So, while we're in this world of suffering and pain, if we can accept the inevitability of that pain in our own and in the life of others, we can begin to see the necessity and the beauty in these harvests of life. We can become open to transitions, and we can start to at least begin to approach the serenity. Painful karma may therefore well be faced with a joyous heart, as a thing to be gladly worked through and done with. It is better to have it behind us than before us, and every debt paid leaves us with less to pay. Would that the world knew and could feel the strength that comes from this resting on the law. It seems callous to approach the karma of others with a joyful heart, and delusional to approach our own gladly. But we'll be better off for having had these difficult experiences. And our choice lies in how we choose to respond to these experiences that come to us and this karma that comes to us in our life. The assurance that perfect justice rules the world in the form of the law of karma Find support from the increasing knowledge of the evolving soul. For as it advances and begins to see on higher planes and to transmit its knowledge to the waking consciousness, we learn with ever growing certainty and therefore with ever increasing joy that the good law is working and with undeviating accuracy, that its agents apply it everywhere with unerring insight, with unfailing strength, and that all is therefore very well with the world and with its struggling souls. As we age, we begin to see the necessity of our tough experiences we've had, the lessons we've learned, and the character that comes from hardship. That character wasn't there before the hardship. If we just accept that karma is working with this in undeviating accuracy, we can begin to find peace in this world of crisis. Through the darkness rings out the cry, all is well from the watchman souls who carry the lamp of divine wisdom through the murky ways of our human city. It seems tough to accept that all is well in a world with crisis all around us. But if we can recognize what our dharma is, what we need for our own growth, and what we're capable of, and we can recognize that not everyone is coming from the same position as we are, we can begin to see that it is indeed all as well. It's not all good, but it's all necessary. In summary, with a more theosophical worldview, I think many of us could find a lot more peace. That means seeing the world as an interrelated and interdependent whole, where we all have a connection through this ordered and meaningful process, where we're all interwoven, interconnected, but bringing our own unique value to the world. When we start to see that, we begin to have more reverence for life, treat others with more compassion, and have respect for what it takes for each individual being to evolve and unfold to become its full potentiality. And we begin to recognize our unity beyond all differences. As we come back to that unity, it's only through having differentiated, it's only through developing our own gifts and then bringing those back to serve others that we really complete this evolution and we move towards our divine purpose. Remember, that is right, which helps the evolution towards divinity, and that is wrong, which drags it backwards or is impeding its progress. And separation is the mark of descent into matter, and unification is the mark of ascent to spirit. That descent into matter was important, but for those of us who are ready to ascend, we need to move away from the separation. Our duty is to abstain from condemning our fellow human beings on hearsay, or we're showing the absence of that spirit within us. It is important that we fight against the root of evil, and we should meet the malignant thought forms with compassion, and we should shatter it. For evil is thus destroyed by compassion. And this hatred that we see in the world around us, it only ceases through love. We should be able to discriminate our own dharma by the characteristics which we find in our inner nature. We should be able to look at ourselves to know what we need next, and others can look within themselves. But that's where the answer comes from. It comes from knowing your own inner nature and come to terms of what stage of evolution that you're at. And remember that ideals too high can check someone else's natural evolution. So we should be careful about what expectations we put upon others and where we expect what choices might be right or wrong for them based on what would be right or wrong for us. Thank you, everybody, for hearing this out. I've gained tremendous comfort and peace in my life through the teachings of Theosophy, and hopefully some of these can help you find more peace in this world of crisis around us. It doesn't mean there's not work to do. It doesn't mean that we don't go fight against evil, but we should fight in a way that's going to be productive and help us achieve our goals.